as we reconcile with the new political realities, it's just the right time to make practical and informed decisions for a better future. Indian Muslims have been one of the most left behind communities as far as development is concerned, partly due to the lack of foresight of their leaders and partly due to their own backwardness. What can they do to become a progressive community? Renowned author Hilal Ahmed is with us to discuss the possibilities. Welcome to The Matrix. Hilal Ahmed is a well-known author and academician who has devoted considerable time in studying Muslim political discourse and Indian Muslim reality, its past and present. Other than writing notable books, he also writes for academic journals, newspapers, and websites in English and Hindi. He's also a documentary filmmaker. Today, we will discuss with him about the future of Muslim community. Welcome to the show, Hilal sir.
Thank you.
My first question to you would be that for the sake of our viewers, why don't you tell us about your background?
It is difficult to explain my background in a few words. I am an academic, work on Muslim politics and Indian democracy and politics of symbol in South Asia. I'm a trained political scientist who has got some interest in history as well. And apart from my usual writing, I believe that it is very important to have some kind of engagement with public life, and that's the reason why I write for newspapers. I write both in Hindi and English, not in Urdu, because Urdu is the language which is I inherited from my family, but I'm trained in Sanskrit and Hindi, and that's the reason why professionally I write in Hindi and English. So this is what I am.
And how did you cultivate your interest regarding issues related to Muslims and their plight in India? How did the big journey begin?
See, we have to make a distinction, not my journey, but I think it is also important for any researcher to think carefully about his or her location in the society. And in my view, that is the part and parcel of what I call intellectual politics. We all are doing some sort of intellectual politics. And for doing that intellectual politics honestly, you have to have three things. Number one, that you have to make a principal distance from the communities you work on. For example, I come from Muslim community and I research on Muslim community. So it is very important for me to make a critical distinction, a principal distance from the people on which I work. Because only then I will be able to critically look at the things and the processes which constitute their present and the direction that present is going to make in future. That's one. The second thing is that we also have to, as researcher, be very honest about the process of research. So especially in Urdu tradition, there was something called, Tamid. You write an introduction to your author. It is a well-established tradition in Urdu literature in the 19th century and early 20th century. So whenever an author writes a book, he or she would introduce himself or herself in a way that the process by which he or she is going to make an argument should be clear to his or her reader. So therefore, the process of research should be made clear to your audience so that your reader will be able to draw his or her own arguments and conclusions. Right. So whatever you write, that's the second thing. The third important point with regard to intellectual politics is that you have to be very clear that whatsoever you are doing is tentative. That's the many things which you are not in search for, or you are not here to tell your reader that you have discovered something called final truth.
Absolute truth.
So absolute truth or final truth. So you have to be very conscious that whatsoever you are going to produce in terms of argument are tentative and context specific. Right. You should not say that I have found something that will applicable in future as well.
Right.
I don't know about what is going to happen in future. So therefore, you have to be very specific, the ways in which you make your argument. So all these three things, you're distancing from the people whom you are working on. The process of research should be transparent and clear, and the tentativeness of your argument. All three contribute to what I called intellectual politics, and you have to take position. So if I take a position in public life is based on this kind of intellectual politics which I practice.
Right. And I believe that includes all branches of human knowledge, including sciences.
Absolutely.
Now, I would like to ask you that you've written a book called Siyasi Muslims, which is in the Indian context regarding Muslims in India. Do you think that Indian Muslims form a political community?
It's a very interesting question, because what is Siyasi? I, instructively and intentionally use the expression Siyasi in that book. And for me, Siyasi is used in two ways. One, Siyasi in a positive way, when you say that a community is conscious of its own political interest, etc. But there is also a negative way in which Siyasi is used. It means that you are doing maneuvering and you know how to make things in your favor collectively. So on the one hand, Siyasi, when we call Muslims Siyasi, we are saying that they are so conscious about their rights as a minority, but at the same time there is an allegation that they behave like that their interests are superior to national interest. So therefore, whenever we talk about Muslim communities, we have to look at how Muslim communities are described in public life. And to counter that public representation, positive as well as negative, it is very important to collect facts, do systematic research, and produce some context-specific argument. And this is what I did in this book called Siyasi Muslim. So I used Siyasi Muslim in order to make an argument that there is no one Muslim community in India. Rather, there are a variety of communities which happen to be Muslims.
Right.
So therefore, their engagement with different forms of politics must be evaluated in different contexts, and that's why the unit of my analysis is state, not nation.
Right. And so there's no harm in being a Siyasi Muslim, is there?
Yeah, there is no harm in using the term Siyasi Muslim, because obviously every community, when we say, as I said, whenever we are talking about Muslim, we are talking about 20 crore people.
Right.
It's a huge number. And who am I to talk about them in like a sweeping generalization?
Right.
I don't want to make that generalization. So therefore, whenever, and that's make this book, the book that is just come out, a brief history of the present, relevant, because in this book I am making a distinction between two things. One is which I called substantive Muslimness, and second is the discourse of Muslimness. So Muslim identity, whenever you do research or whenever you explore Muslim identity, you have to be very clear about those two things. Substance of Muslimness, meaning that Muslim identity is constituted in a particular context. So you may be, it is constituted by a factor like caste, factor like your economic class, and the language and the kind of Islam you practice. So it is very concrete and real. But there is something called discourse of Muslimness, meaning how Muslims are perceived as a community, as a minority in positive sense, as a threat to the nation in negative sense.
Right.
So therefore, the interplay between substantive Muslimness and the discourse of Muslimness will always determine the ways in which Muslim identity is constituted in different contexts.
Right.
So that kind of interaction determine various things. Like for example, naming the recent notification by UP government to name all the Thelewalas during the Kanwad Yatra.
Yes.
Now, in terms of substantive Muslimness, you find that these people are very much part of the local ecosystem. They are inextricably linked to the practices like Kanwad for years. So nobody is going to question them.
Right.
And it has been happening for centuries.
Sure.
But when it comes to discourse of Muslimness, Muslimness seen as a threat to Hinduism. And that's why this order was passed.
Right.
So therefore, there is a difference between substantive Muslimness and the discourse of Muslimness.
Right.
And that's why many people, if you look at social media, you find many examples. Many people actually, try to unpack this order in such a way that, okay, fine, the naming of the sailor is mentioned, he or she is Muslim. But what about the origin of the fruit? Fruit might come from a bag of a Muslim farmer.
Right.
So how would you do that? So therefore, that is actually the problem of discourse of Muslimness. So substantive Muslimness, my argument is in this book is that substantive Muslimness is answer to the negative portrayal of Muslim identity in public life.
Okay. And my one related question is that Hindutva as a political project, if you like, has been brewing for a long time, ever since Indian independence, and perhaps it was not addressed earlier in the manner in which it could have been, but now it's a reality. How should Indian Muslims reconcile with this new reality? Do you think while they protect their human rights, they also need to have a look inwards?
There are two parts of this question. First part, as a researcher, my obvious reaction would be that what is Hindutva? In what ways we are going to use this term? Many people, and especially intellectual associated with Congress, raise this question that there is a distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva. I do not subscribe to that view. Hindutva as a project has evolved over the years, and what is interesting is that Hindu nationalism had various strands, various branches, and Hindutva was one of them. Right. It was led by Hindu Mahasabha at one point of time. RSS was highly uncomfortable with the term Hindutva. They did not use the term until 1980s.
Right.
So RSS in fact critical of the term Hindutva. RSS never used the term Hindutva. For them, Indianization was the preferred expression to assert Indianness. Hindutva became fashionable, and it was actually encouraged by Vishwa Hindu Parishad during the time of Barwi Masjid Ram Temple movement, and after some time RSS also adopted it. So it created a lot of problem for them that how should we define Hindutva. So therefore in 2018 Mohan Bhagwat delivered 3 lectures to actually appropriate Hindutva and to tell people that okay, RSS is now comfortable with the term Hindutva, but they made it very clear that our Hindutva is not the Hindutva of Savarkar. Right. So therefore, what is RSS's Hindutva is something which we must understand. It is different from Savarkar's Hindutva. One. Second thing is that because it has become a dominant narrative of Indian politics at the moment. No, it is absolutely wrong to think that only Congress, only BJP is using Hindutva as an ideology. No, because it is a narrative. It's a dominant narrative of politics, and you cannot ignore the dominant narrative while you are doing politics of electoral kind.
Right, across the party line.
Across the party line. So in some way or the other, you have to engage with that, and that's why all political parties use Hindutva in some senses. Many would say, no, we are not anti-Muslim, etc. But we appreciate Hindutva because Hindutva-driven nationalism is the dominant, as I said, dominant narrative of Indian politics. Right. Now, if that is the case, then it is very important for us to look at the placing of Muslim in this Hindutva project. Sure. Now, in the public life, whatsoever we have understood and whatsoever we have found in our survey, it is a clear reflection that Indian, obviously when I say Hindu communities, Hindu communities would like to assert their Hindu identity, but that Hindu identity does not mean that it is anti-Muslim. Right. In virtually every survey we found this. People would say that without Islam, India is incomplete.
That's very interesting.
92-93% people, and not merely in CSDS surveys, but also in Pew survey, which we did in 2021. It was overwhelming that India belongs to all.
Wonderful.
And if India belongs to all, now that's an important finding. Now what is happening at the moment is that political class, and when I say political class, it means BJP as well as non-BJP parties. Right. The entire political class, they do not want to buy that argument. They are a bit uncomfortable with this because Hindutva-driven nationalism is something which is, as I said, dominant narrative of politics. So in order to do politics of that kind, you require or you have to accept the fact that there is a difference between Hindus and Muslims. Right. But in reality, and that's why the point I just made, substantive Muslimness is the answer. because for Hindu communities, Muslimness does not pose any threat, because they, obviously, there is an organic relationship between Hindu communities and Muslim communities. Sure. So therefore, coming back to the second part of your question, that what should Muslim do? I think what is happening at the moment is also important. As I said, that these are the findings of various surveys. So at the moment, if we say that Hindus and Muslims are, there is an antagonism between Hindus and Muslims, it's absolutely wrong, because nationally, yes, Muslims and Hindus are looking at each other. But why that discourse of Hindu-Muslim is actually gaining momentum time and again. In our surveys, what we find, the most striking problem of people of India is economic disparity. Now, in order to hide those substantive issues, you need some kind of a discussion, a public discourse in which things would revolve around identity issues. So there is basically two discourses happening. At the grassroots level, people are worried about what is happening in terms of economic life. But at the public life that is there in the public discourses, you find that Hindu Muslims have evolved as legitimate political categories. So therefore, there is a big gap between these two. This election actually clearly reflected that gap, because we did a lot of field work. In fact, I went to various sites, especially in UP, and whenever I went, Hindu-Muslim question was not the central question for voters. For them, economic disparity, joblessness, poverty, these were the important concerns. And they wanted to see things happening. So therefore, the point I'm trying to make is this, that the Muslim questions, the questions Muslims have, the anxieties Muslims have, are actually Indian anxieties. So therefore, to think Muslim outside or different from the Indian realities is a big mistake. Right. So therefore, what is happening in India is actually part and parcel of Muslim anxieties and expectations. So therefore, there is a need to look at the bigger picture and place Muslim in it. So both the books have tried to do that.
And it's interesting that at the grassroots level, as far as discourse is concerned, those people are the least affected or affected, grassroots level. They are comfortable with the identities, the coexistence. When it comes to political discourse, then it becomes a bit, more intense and, So now my next question to you would be that, this is a common problem, not just of Indian Muslims, but the Muslims in Indian subcontinent. Does the conflict between Islam and modernity affect Indian Muslims? If yes, how?
It's an interesting question, because the religion which we call Islam, and I think that's why we have to contextualize Islam in South Asia very carefully, because there is a tendency to see Islam as static and unchanging, which is absolutely wrong. So, for example, 5-pillar imagination of Islam, the way in which it is presented to Muslim Sunni communities is very modern, because to think, or the Madrasa system, it's very much modern. So the Muslim identities which we have in South Asia are somehow the product of very specific modernity that has been evolving over the years in the subcontinent. So therefore, it is a modern project. I don't buy the argument that there is a conflict between modernity and Islam. Rather, Islam has modernized and expressed itself in a religion which is a modern religion. Right. And whatsoever actually has been done in the name of Islam is also modern project. So we have to make a distinction between the spiritual aspect of religion and the political aspect of it. Spiritual aspect of religion will take you when you read Quran and think spiritually, and you will develop yourself to a stage where the this worldly consideration would become irrelevant for you. That's a spiritual part.
Sure.
But when it comes to ritualistic part, these rituals are completely modern. Now, I'll give you one example, by the way. Devband. Look at the curriculum of Devband Madrasa. It is very much modern. Or all the Sunni madrasas, or the organization, or look at their formation. These are very much modern.
Right.
So therefore, I think the debate is rather outdated. This is a 19th century debate which see Islam as an static religion and posing Islam as a threat to modernity, etc. I think at the moment we have resolved that tension. Because look at modern Muslims. They are very much religious. They do not find any difficulty in accommodating modern values with the Islamic values.
Right.
And that's why people like me, who obviously by conventional sense I'm a practicing Muslim. I offer 5-time namaz, etc. But I do not find any problem in my conduct to see or to adhere to progressive values like equality, social justice, etc. Or to celebrate my Indian identity. So therefore, Muslims, actually it's a very specific form of modernity, Muslim modernities, which have evolved over the years in the subcontinent and especially in India, and which somehow, people did not give intellectual attention to these processes. My last example is coming from Tablighi Jamaat. Now look at the methodology adopted by Tablighi Jamaat to become the dominant religiosity of Sunni Islam in North India in last 30 years. Tablighi Jamaat, obviously hafte ke 3 din, 3 days you have to offer 5-time namaz, then you have to do lot of different things, and all these things will make it, these are obviously, it's a dawa or the inviting Muslim to become more Islamic. And this Dawat project or the reform project was not directed towards Hindus or non-Muslims. It was actually Tablighi Jamaat operated among Muslims.
Sure.
So the idea was to make Muslim more Islamic rather than actually conversion or converting Hindus.
But in the Indian
Muslims.
context, it becomes
look at because we have been discussing outdated modernity. The 19th century discourse has completely gone. So it is very important to recognize what kind of modern religiosity has evolved in Indian context and what are the reflections of this modernity and how these reflections produce different social forms.
Right. But you see, education is an important part of modernity. Do you think that Indian madrasas, and I am not talking specifically of a few madrasas which are big ones like Darul Uloom and other Muslim educational institutes are good enough to prepare community students to meet the future challenges ahead of us?
First of all, one fact which we must remember is that this is actually now in public domain, that only 3 or 4% students, Muslim children, they go to madrasa. Only 3 or 4. Others are going in usual schools.
Right.
So therefore, we should not, exaggerate this point that every Muslim is going to madrasa.
Sure.
No, that's not true. Only 3%, 3 or 4%. One. Second is that there is a lot of enthusiasm of among Muslims to send their children for normal education. So they are going in usual schools. Third and important point, and this has started when I was a child, because my parents, they took a conscious decision not to send us to any Urdu medium school. They sent us to Hindi medium school and Sanskrit school in order to equip us so that we can compete in the job market later in later phases of our life. So what I'm trying to say to this question is that and my colleague Sanjir Alam, who has done a lot of work on this area, I think his work is very pioneering, and because he is a statistics person and things like that, his work actually shows us something which is very important, that there is an intrinsic relationship between educational backwardness of Muslims and employment opportunities. So if your class, if you belong to a lower class, no matter which religion you belong to, your educational level will decline. So therefore we need to look at the class structure among Muslims so as to understand which kind of Muslim is facing educational difficulties, and why that upward mobility is not happening among a section of Muslims. So therefore, to actually diversify this question of education will solve the problem. And that's the reason why, and we have just finished a report which is funded by US India Policy Institute, and it is on rethinking affirmative action for Muslims in contemporary India. And we have made this point that it is very important, especially with regard to education, that private sector must be involved in order to rethink the question of Muslim backwardness. Because if we do not engage with the private sector, the state sector won't be able to solve the problems which Muslims and other deprived communities of Muslims and other marginalized section of society. So you have to understand the spatial dimension as well as the caste and class dimension of Muslims in order to understand and what are the problems and how to deal with these problems. So obviously it's a mixed approach is needed in order to address the question which you raised.
Hilal, but a large number of Muslim students may not be going to madrasas.
Absolutely.
The fact exists that we have madrasas all over the country. If the students don't go there, what can be done about those madrasas? Can they be, conditioned in a way which prepares students, if they go there and they get quality education, which will make them relevant in today's society?
I think many things are changing now. If you go to any madrasa, you find that first of all we have to make a distinction between maktab and madrasa.
Sure.
So residential spaces are madrasas and maktabs are the places where students go learn Quran, come back.
Yeah.
Now in both maktabs and madrasas, you find that there is a lot of emphasis on modern education. And it all depends. As I said, that suppose if a madrasa is located in a remote Bihar village, so obviously the capacity building of that madrasa is more important than to look at what they are teaching, because obviously if the imam or the person who is running that mosque and madrasa is not paid, how should we expect him to give modern education, etc.
Right.
But that is not true. If whenever, especially North India, whenever I go, I find that in every maktab there's a lot of emphasis on teaching English and teaching mathematics. So therefore the changes are happening at the moment. I don't think that they are only teaching traditional subjects, and it is not true that they have reduced everything to religion. So in this book we have looked at the question of religiosity. How do Muslims look at Islam? How do they practice their religion? And we find that Muslim religiosity is actually also changing. Now Muslim would like to see things which are happening outside that worldly, but for the inward looking things they are becoming more spiritual, and for the outward, meaning the upward mobility, etc. So they would like to create a balance between these two, and the madrasas and mosques have become a site where many things are changing.
Right.
So as I said, that virtually every madrasa is teaching English and mathematics, and there are mosques where you don't have any maktab or madrasa. Like-minded people would sit down and think about creating informal network where some kind of an education or upward mobility possibilities can be explored.
Right.
So I think that I haven't done research on that, because that is not my area. Means education is, I'm interested in education, but I have not done any systematic research.
Right.
But whatsoever I have done in terms of research and my own ethnographic fieldwork, on the basis of that I can say with full confidence that Muslims are very much conscious. Every section of Muslim society is very much conscious about their own condition, challenges which are there, and they are actually, which I called in this book, survival strategies. They are very much interested in evolving new survival strategies. Right. So I'll give you my last example and then I'll stop. And that is that when this order came with regard to offering namaz on roads, many mosques they decided that on on Friday, they would have 3 congregational prayers, not one, so that there is no possibility that the crowd will go outside.
That's a very good decision.
Yeah, three
Yes.
consecutive congregational prayer, three khutbahs.
Yes, because it's allowed in the religion.
Yeah, in the allowed. So therefore, this is called liberation theology. Muslims are practicing this, and this progressive attitude must be recognized.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we have people, and that's why the modernity question was very relevant, and it's a very perfect question, because we still think that Islam and modernity are two very different things. But these are modern challenges, and Muslims who practice Islam in a variety of ways have evolved their own ways to accommodate these Muslim questions in their spiritual and religious lives. So therefore things are changing. I'm not saying that everything is perfect among Muslims.
Yes.
That's why we have to have a critical view. But it does not mean that we should not appreciate the positive things that have happened over the years.
Right, absolutely.